Welcome to We Weren't Supposed to Exist. Conversations about belonging, meaning making, and the ecology of human beings. Welcome, everyone. I'm Cher Griffin, a doctoral student in transformative social change, founder of the Compassion Collective, and your host of We Weren't Supposed to Exist. This podcast begins with a simple question. What does Gestalt language processing mean to you? There are no right answers. Sometimes people answer through language, sometimes through relationships, creativity, spirituality, system thinking, or lived experience. Today's guest is Kara Helene. I hope I'm pronouncing that correct,
Yep.
Kara. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Writer of The Regenerative Hearth on Substack, where she explores what it means to live in greater alignment with ourselves, our communities, and the living world around us. When Kara filled out the guest form, she shared something that immediately caught my attention. She spoke about watching people who already understand that many of our cultural systems are unsustainable, yet still find themselves stuck in patterns that don't reflect the values they hold. She asked a powerful question. What helps people move from knowing to living differently? This is going to be a good conversation. I have a feeling that question may take us in some unexpected directions today. Kara, welcome to We Weren't Supposed to Exist. And what does Gestalt language processing mean to you?
Well, thank you, Cher. It's a delight to be here. It's interesting because I think had you asked me this question and we had this conversation yesterday, I would have been like complete blank and be like, I know the word, but I don't have anything to associate with it. And I happen to be looking at someone who does equine related therapy here
Mm.
locally. And it's Gestalt equine related therapy. And so I was like, wait, what are these two things combined? Right. And so then I was reading it and was like, wow, that seems like how I already perceive the universe, at least the way that they were talking about it, right? About this being this very like experiential, somatic based inner inquiry process.
Mhm.
So at least that's what I took from it. And I was like, oh, that's my way of being in the world. But there's like a
Yeah.
name for that. So that was really fascinating. So I'm curious, hearing from you as a practitioner of that, what does that mean for you? And how do you feel that that's something different that people
Yeah.
can relate
Well,
to?
okay. Okay. That's great because this is going to take us in a lot of different directions. Um, so I came to understand Gestalt language processing, which my listeners kind of probably have already heard this story in one way or another, but um, uh, um, through a diagnosis of autism. And so, but I really didn't come to it through that. It's just where I learned the word, right? It's the same thing you just said. You're like, wait a second. This is how I've always been. This is just how I experience the world. And so when I came, the first place that I really came across the term and any kind of like understanding around it was Jamie Horwick's work. She's also on Substack, the Aught side, and she's also a Gestalt language processor. And when I was first learning about uh, what it kind of meant for me to be autistic. I was reading a bunch of stuff like we all do, right? Going all down all the different rabbit holes. But I came across Jamie Horwick's book, No Place for Autism. And that book isn't specifically about Gestalt language processing, but it connected me to Jamie because I was like, hold on. This person is explaining this in a way that nothing else I've read yet explains, right? Like the DSM was like, no, sorry, like just not quite it, not quite it. And just some of the old literature on neurodivergence and autism and ADHD and these kinds of things, it all like gave me like little pieces, but I was like, no, no, this just really isn't me. And then when I read her work, I was like, okay, now I get it. Now I see what's happening here. And not that all autistic people are Gestalt language processors, but there is a very high prevalence of Gestalt language processing in um, the autistic community. And I think that what I'm noticing, what I'm experiencing, the more I speak with individuals who are kind of learning about this kind of way of Gestalt language processing is specifically how we learn language. And so, how you learn language, this is where I'm going to intersect with what you were talking about here, is also how we make meaning in other domains, right? And so, I have found that there are a lot of non-autistic people who are Gestalt language processors too, or lean maybe more because maybe it's more of a spectrum, but lean towards this type of Gestalt-based kind of thinking. There's also, there's a whole body of work on Gestalt psychology, which is funny because years before I discovered I was autistic and I was studying psychology, it was Gestalt psychology that was the one I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I see what's going on. Okay, this is making sense. And so, yeah, I think that the term Gestalt language processing is specific to how uh, a child learns language in their development, but it expands beyond that. Um, Jamie, in her work, talks a lot about this. Uh, and this is where I want to kind of tip back to what you were saying, that somatic, the knowing before the knowing, right? Does that land for you? Is that kind of where you were going with that?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I think a lot of my background, I mean, I spent 25 years in science and academia and the world of policy and conservation work. And so I was all in my head for most of my life.
Mm.
And I had my oldest, my daughter, and suddenly no amount of books or information could explain the experience I was having in my life within me and with her. And I was like, oh God, what do I do? And so it was this really painful, like snake shedding skin moment, right? Of, oh God, I have to just intuitively figure this out and trust myself. What? Right? Like it was very mind blowing and awkward and painful and challenging. And from there it started to evolve into much more like, hmm, why is that? Why did my mind fail me in this moment? Why did the literal small amount of dissertation level research that I did, like I have a master's, I know how to do ridiculous amounts of research. So I could have had like a master's in parenting with all the books I'd read, right? I was like, and none of them worked. None of them worked, right? So that to me was like this like watershed moment of my life about being like, my brain doesn't have all the answers. Oh wow, other people's brains also don't have all the answers. Oh no, what do we do with that gray area in the middle? And so I started going back and being like, how do other cultures who don't spend so much time in their heads, how do they do these things, these very
Mm.
primal, instinctive, intuitive things that humans have been doing for thousands of years, right?
Mm.
Like
Yeah.
that, that had oral cultures and traditions and community connections that were passing down wisdom and knowledge. How does that work? And so for me, it was a very like liberating process to be like,
Yeah.
oh, the Western mindset isn't the only way to look at the world,
Yeah.
right? And not just that too, but it was also like, oh my God, we have such like a myopic view of
Mhm.
ourselves in that way. Like
Yeah.
even, I have family who did a lot of psychological testing as part of their work in the world.
Mhm.
And I would get into these debates with him about like, you realize your sample sizes are all based on Western white people, generally affluent, and probably were college students at the time.
Mm.
So what is that saying about like, yes, sure, maybe you had a quote unquote sample size, the right number, but what's the diversity of that sample size? It only applies to like 20-year-old middle class white people. Like,
Yeah.
and so that was like this whole other thing, right? Like starting to get
Yeah.
into understanding like how much of what is being sold, particularly in America and in
Yeah.
Western society, right, as like the only way to do things, the
Yeah.
only way to perceive the world, relate to the world, ignore the world, right,
Hmm.
is the way it's always been done. It's the only way there
Yeah.
is, right? And that was, I think, for me, like a really interesting moment of changing away from like, wow, how much of the mainstream narrative that science claims is the only way to do something
Hmm.
is only because science can't prove the other ways of doing things.
Yeah. They don't have the right tools, right? The right, but we talk, gosh, I mean, you landed in the right spot today. Let's just say this is gonna be a good conversation. Um, but also same Z's, but in my own way, right? My pathways into this kind of, what I don't know, deconstruction of Western thought. And like the constant process of seeing what we're trying to understand what we're missing, what we're ignoring, what are the assumptions built into even the scientific method, which I Won't go there in this podcast,
Yes,
but
that could be a whole other podcast.
whole other podcast. But and that was a lot of how I ended up doing the work that I do now, right? Is I went through something challenging in my life, and it broke something open in me, right? Where I had to look at things um, maybe from a different lens. And I got the opportunity to do that too. People think that's weird that I say that like the things I went through were horrific, and they also did something really beautiful for me. So it's like it's a both and. And
Yeah.
so um it allowed me to I like to use this word remember, because I think a lot of what I've come to understand in the work that I've been doing uh, is that um, Western thought systems, Western systems in general, but thought systems are kind of, that's the underlying of what's
The
created.
software.
Yeah, software that's creating this um, are not superior, number one. They're one thought system among, gosh, so many, right? And um, I went down that path too, really trying to understand multiple indigenous worldviews, not just kind of the synthesis of it, but the from African cosmologies, all across the board. And again, it was just this. This is before the autism thing. Like I was like, yeah, yeah, I mean, it was just obvious. It was just like everything I mean, we can get into the Tao, into process philosophy. Like I was like, wait a second, they're all saying the same thing too. Like
Yes.
that was the other part. I'm like, how does a Western thought system see basically the global majority have a completely different thought process on human thriving, on human beings in community, on human organization, on all of these different things, and you think that your little tiny spot in the middle is the spot, right? Oh,
Yes. Well, and have you ever read Sand Talk by Tyson Yunkaporta?
um, no, but I've read something else by him. Oh,
Maybe his
can't,
newer one.
I can't remember the title of the book, but I will put it on my list. But go ahead, yeah, let's hear.
What I really loved when I was reading his book, and this was, I got divorced in 2020, and I was doing a lot of reading about like trying to understand. At that point, I'd had my second child, and it was like, I am watching the way they move through the world, and it's not aligning with parenting books, and
Mm,
this is what is happening. Like I'm watching the way that my brain works and their brain works, and it's not lining up in a way that makes sense with the mainstream narrative, but the way it works makes complete sense for them.
mhm,
And I was like, and it's innate. They're so little. This isn't something, right, that's like been pushed on them. Like they came out of the womb this way. So
mhm,
why is that? And when I was reading Sand Talk, he started talking about, very much what you're saying about Gestalt language processing. Most indigenous cultures are what he calls very high context. To
mhm,
understand something, you have to understand its relationship to the world around it.
mhm,
Right. And then that's so much of their oral culture is all about that. That's how they learn. That's how they remember things. That's how they pass down tradition. Right. And that we are wired to learn through story. That's how our brain innately wants to take in information.
mhm,
But when we start teaching it written word and we start forcing it to translate what's in here out through a hand and a pencil or a keyboard, it changes the way our brain is wired and the way it processes information and the way it communicates and the way it remembers all of it. And I was like, yes, right? Because the Western
mhm.
mindset is very reductionistic. It's like, I want to break everything down and understand all the nuts and bolts. And most indigenous worldviews are like, what's the point?
Yeah. And
How, like,
yeah,
how do
what
you
is,
understand what something is if you don't know how it's related to and what its
mhm,
relationship is to everything around it, right?
yeah, absolutely. a
And
hundred
I was like,
percent.
yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. And it also at that time was starting to really reflect my own journey moving through my 40s of I used to be a voracious reader. Like just could put down a book a week like crazy, sometimes in a few days.
Hmm.
And I started getting to a point of like I just didn't want to read anymore.
Hmm.
I didn't. And so for a while I was listening to audiobooks And that was a very different experience. And I was like, okay, I'm getting this. This is good. Um, but I even was starting to realize how much sometimes that was like a voracious appetite for needing others to validate my perspective rather than feel good in my own version
Yeah.
of truth of what it
Yeah.
was.
Yeah. Wow. That makes me pull like a string here of just something I've grappled with kind of constantly. Um, I'm in academia right now, and my program is transformative social change. So it's like, wait a second, am I in academia or am I hacking academia? And and yeah,
Mhm.
and it's like it's been such an interesting experience to be studying um, this type of work, transformative work in a institution, fundamentally a system, though my institution is humanistic institution that helps tremendously, right? But
Yeah.
as technically a disabled human, um, who has a cognitive architecture that does not align with academic standards by any means whatsoever. And and then studying like the work that I study in transformative social change is those underlying assumptions like with the written word. Why does my research like I'm constantly questioning, and within my program that's like that's it's yeah, that's legit, we do that there. But I step into like the research program, and which I have to be in too, right? I have to also participate in that. And it's like I'm kind of I'm trying, sometimes successfully, sometimes unsuccessfully, to build that bridge. What does it mean to decolonize our learning, right? Like what does that actually mean in practice, like in the institution? And do I want to stay in the institute? That's a question that keeps coming up for me too, is I have not published anything, and that has been intentional. I could go through that process, that publishing process. I have
Mhm.
good work. It's not about that. I know what the process is. I can I can like identify the implications of all the assumptions in the process. Like, and so I chose not to. I'm choosing not to. That's why all of my work is done publicly. And it's public scholarship in many, many ways, which some people think that is uh, potentially could be harmful to communities. So it's another yes and here, right? The ethics of public scholarship are if and um, when they are seriously considered and seriously aligned with are so much more um, than institutional ethics around scholarship. And so it's kind of like, I have to I'm right on that line all the time, always kind of figuring that out. And then I think also I think the reason why this podcast started was I was like, is writing my work the best way for it to get out there? I mean, it's just me and my words, right? What does that really mean? And and I do my best to kind of really make it community oriented and open up for different perspective and different thought processes and all of these things. But then I was like, well, if it's all about relationship, which I believe it is, right? I believe consciousness is relational, then I think the best way that we practice that is by practicing that, right? Which is what
Yes.
this podcast is it's that practice of learning differently, learning together, learning in relationship. And I don't know what the heck I'm doing. I'll say that. I have no idea. No clue. There's no real like because it's transformative social change is not Western thought. So there isn't this like um here's the 12-step plan of, like that's not really what we do.
Yes.
You know?
Well, and it brings me back. So Tyson Caporta, he is also he has his doctorate and he's a researcher. I cannot remember which institution in Australia he is faculty of, but he talks a lot about this theme of walking between these two worlds and feeling really torn by that. And and I think it's a really interesting question because like I think back to days of, when I was in marine science, I was studying in Miami and I was blessed to be around a lot of like what were like the grandfathers of coral reef science. And and they told some stories about the early days. They were like pretty like, you did what? Right? Like there was some stuff that there was not a lot of oversight and they were just kind of winging it as they went.
Yeah.
But there was this distinct feeling that, before, well, probably before the 1920s, like that was the area of like, you weren't a scientist, you were a naturalist, you were a student of life.
Mm.
There wasn't applying for grants, there wasn't this whole infrastructure. There was you
Mhm.
followed your curiosity and you discovered something and you shared it with others.
Yeah.
That it was this open sense of discovering for humanity at large. It wasn't like, I'm going to hoard this finding to myself, right? And so you can see how the kind of like the DNA of capitalism, right, has kind of gotten infused into the academic process.
Oh my gosh,
So
yes.
I think there is something really beautiful and progressive about what you're doing that aligns much more with that, because in Sand Talk, he talks a lot about, whenever we have information that we're sharing, they're yarning, right? They call it yarning, is like having a conversation, and everyone's always welcome to jump in and add their piece and perspective, and that adds and cross pollinates to what's
Yeah.
happening.
Yes.
And it sounds to me that's the type of process that you're bringing in as well, is like,
Yeah.
how do we have voices who have experience and perspective so that we cross pollinate and create something better than what it could have been had it just been you on your own.
Absolutely. That's 100% like when I created my master's thesis was the cognitive ecology model. And again, my program is very emergent, right? Like I didn't come into the program thinking, yeah, I'm going to write a model. Like, and and I really just never even wanted to call it a model. I still hung up on that word big time because it's not a model. But
Yep.
um, but I was like, how do I create it's more of like, how do I create a container that um, uh, keeps expanding the more that gets, right? The more that comes in, instead of creating a model that gatekeeps things from changing it. So I wanted a model that how do I say this? That the more perspective, the more experience, lived experience, the more understanding, the more that came into it actually made the model what it is, right? So it's always that the goal of it is that it should change. It should change. Like if my model doesn't change, then it's not working. It's not working. And a lot of like my early study was I always say that I have this is just my way of saying it, but I say I have a degree in the psychology of change because I have a degree in the psychology of addiction, which is the psychology of change. And as we can make that connection another time if anybody has questions about that, because I know that um, could be hard for people to understand that. But the psychology of change for me was understanding. One thing I learned early in some of that work was, the biopsychosocial medical, like and then, I was like, well, what about spiritual? What about culture? Like, I was like, there's more, there's more, there's more. Like, there's so many relationships. So not just relationships between human to human, but a relationship between me and the systems, my relationship to my institution, my relationship to my local community, my relationship to um, uh, other systems, like a disability system. What is my relationship to that? Um, I mean, the model continues to show you that. That's the goal. It's to help you see more, not less, right? It's not to reduce. It's like doing the opposite of reduction. And the one thing I find most fascinating about it is um, sometimes people come in and are like, yes, yes, this is like what yes, I see it. I see me. I see me. And can you add this? Like it's somewhere along those lines. And then I have people who get very, um, I'm kind of like either end of the spectrum here when it comes to this, folks who want me to reduce it. They're like, I don't understand. It's too much. It's too complex. It's too, so I struggle in that tension too, where I'm like, I don't want to reach, I do not want to create you a 12-step plan because it will reduce what the model is. You have to like, for me, the cognitive ecology model is for you to enter. It's for you to go, oh, where am I here? And what does that mean? What does that relationship mean in my life? What does that mean? It shows you things sometimes maybe that you don't want to see too. And so maybe that's some of the pushback that I get as well, um, because we've all been there. And I say that with humility. Like I don't see everything. Absolutely not. That's why I need other humans to help me see. And I've been at that point where I couldn't see a lot of these things because of the where I was standing in the system. And
Mm.
so the bigger system, but also my own family system, my own system, how I related to myself and my own needs. And so it's a process, I think, like to and it's different for everyone too. I think like the more I kind of pay attention to these stories. I pay attention to stories. That's a big part of my work is I just listen to people and I listen to how people are experiencing things online or in my community or in the work that I do on Substack. And uh, there's a common thread. It's just how people are coming to that thread is just different, right? Spiritual awakenings, maybe through this, integral theory model or this model or through um, a upheaval in life, something that that collapsed your sense of self that then had to be rebuilt. And I think that's kind of how I see transformation, right? Like, but I don't think that this is where I'm going to squeeze us back into your work is, um, I also think that if we stop at transformation or if we stay in that loop too, like there's a point where it just kind of transformation just continues and we have to think about regeneration, right? Like when we and maybe this is kind of your question too, like when we know what our values are, when we know how we want to show up in the world, who we want to be in community with, the types of values that align with us, how do we make that, and that's maybe the tension even that I have in academia is like how do we make that happen in a world that hasn't caught up yet?
Yes. Yes, that is the question, right? When you are the wayfinder, right? And you are hacking the path through the brush that no one else has cut through yet. And you
Hmm.
see it and you know where you're going. And it's not see it because you see it, but it's because you feel it, right? It's like, I know I'm supposed to go this way. I can't explain it. I can't point to a research paper or some document that's going to validate this. I just feel that this is where I'm supposed to be going. And we keep heading in that direction. And sometimes you can be years ahead of the curve. Sometimes you could be a decade ahead of the curve.
Hmm.
And that's something I've been wrestling with a lot too lately is, I think 15 years ago, I turned my urban home into an urban homestead, a permaculture homestead. Ripped out all the grass, planted nothing but natives and edible food, our whole front yard, and we were in downtown St. Petersburg, Florida, in a very like nice part of town. And so people are like, "Where'd your grass go?" Right? Like it was very odd. And they're like, "You have chickens and food and stuff." Right? It was that type of like they
Yeah.
like their brain was like not computing, right?
Uh-huh.
And fast forward like 5 years, and then they're all like, "Hey, this is really cool. Can you show me how to do a little bit of this in my yard?" And I was like, "Okay, cool." And at the time, I was like, "Oh, maybe I can transition out of my consulting work and help people design yards.
Hmm.
Like really environmentally friendly, feed yourself. All this would be really cool." And people are like, "Why would I pay you for that?" And I was like, "Okay." Fast forward another decade, and now it's like, "Oh, permaculture design course, and people are doing all these things and getting paid for this." And I was like, "Oh, it's cool. That's what happens when you're a visionary and you're like 15 years ahead of
Uh-huh.
your time,
Hmm.
right?" So
I feel you.
sometimes you
Oh,
feel like you're
I
the
just
salmon swimming upstream, right?
it feels so good for you just to say that out loud. And I know some of my listeners are going to also feel that. Like we are all going to feel like, thank you. Thank you, because this isn't, it's so true. It's a real phenomenon. It's a real phenomenon. There are trailblazers in the world. There are people who just say, see potential and make it happen in whichever way they need to make it happen. And people are looking at them like they're weirdo crazos for believing in this thing. And then, yeah, 3, 5, 10, 15 years later, all of a sudden that thing that was so weird and odd and is now institutionalized. It's capitalized on, right? That's part of why so much, I have a charter for the cognitive ecology model. I did this intentionally because I was like, no institutions co-opting this. Like this belongs to the community. It belongs to us. It belongs to the people. I do not want capitalism or institutional structures as they currently stand taking that work because they'll butcher it. And I don't say that in a way that's like, um, these people aren't smart enough, or it has nothing to do with people. It has to do with structure. The structure can't currently hold the the um the vision, right? They can't yet.
And most structures, once they're created, the inherent systems dynamic of it is to maintain the status quo, is to maintain
Hmm.
itself, and to prevent change by doing that.
Hmm.
And so, by definition of the way you're describing your model, right, is it's supposed to evolve and grow. So,
Yeah.
putting it into an institution is literally going to kill it, and not because people are intentionally doing it, but because at
Yeah.
some point everyone's like, well, we got to preserve the identity of this organization
Yeah.
and the identity of our work, and who am I in the
Hmm.
course of that system, and how do I fundraise around that, and right, like I've worked for nonprofits for a very long time, like I know how that goes, right, that it's
Hmm.
not meant to, but again, the capitalistic DNA gets baked in.
Yeah.
That's like, I have to protect and hoard this thing so that only I can get money to do this thing. Because
Hmm.
if other people get money, then that means I'm not getting money, right? There's always like a scarcity
Hmm.
nugget that's in there
Yeah.
somewhere. And that's
Oh,
what starves everything and kills it eventually, right? Because we're
yeah.
holding on so tight, it's struggling until it dies.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think about that, and there's so many different spaces and places that we see that happen. Like I think about that even with like the neurodiversity movement. I wrote an article about this, about what happened to the neurodiversity movement. And a lot of things happen. Like a lot of things like movements, things happen, things change, politics change, things and things move differently. I mean, having like a whole generation of late diagnosed autistic women changed the movement quite. I mean, you didn't think we weren't gonna change it. I don't know. I don't know what you were thinking. Like, but but I think about that a lot because it, even just like the idea of neurodiversity, nobody owns I mean, somebody coined a term, but nobody owns that idea. That just is. That just is. Neurodiversity just is. And just like all other forms of diversity, if we want to get into like the ecological perspective on that, we need diversity for the evolution of our species. That is required, and
Yes.
neurologically as well. And so somewhere in this in the between like the 90s and now, like it got reduced so it could fit into institutions, so that institutions could become neurodivergent affirming, so they could have their labels, so they could do their recognition events, so that they could get their funding, so that and yeah, like you have worked in nonprofits, I understand the mechanisms, I understand why they're there, and still think they're good. And so it's like I don't want that to be um, I don't want that to be this movement, whatever this is. I mean, this is a movement because we're moving, we're doing something. I don't know. I don't know if all of us know what it is yet, but we're doing something. There's movement happening, and uh, um, I think as soon as we try and push that through some kind of institutional political agenda, then that's where we're going to lose it. And I hope people who are listening understand like the implications of that, like transformative social change work kind of needs to be the underthrow in a lot of ways. And I'm not saying that a lot of the work can't enter. I mean, those bridges need to be built. Absolutely. And there's so much good work happening in that way. So this is not an either or, this isn't a black and white. This is a just think about the implications of how, where, when, why you move transformative work into your communities. Uh, it's a lot to think about. I think about it all the time because I'm like, well, I still have to sustain myself, right? I have to live. I live in a capitalist society. So in order for me to sustain a life, to pay my mortgage, to make sure my kids are okay, I have to have income coming in. And and so that's been like the one area right now I spend a lot of time on like social enterprise work, like community governance, like what does it look like to do it differently? And a lot of people are doing this work. I'm not the only one by any means whatsoever. Um, and so I think sometimes I just think, wow, I look back about, even just a year ago, and I think my network was pretty small. I had gone through something pretty big burnout. So I kind of went like, had to do like kind of a retreat into myself. Um, and then something changed, and the connections are just kind of flowing at this point where I'm starting to see people I connected with here and people here, and now they're connecting. And it's like you're kind of just watching the web grow. Like that's how I feel it. I can feel it growing. And that's just my critical hope right there. Like, I don't want to be that type of person who just thinks we're screwed. Fascism's got us. Like that's nothing we can do. I don't believe that. I just fundamentally don't believe that. And I think that a lot of us are already doing things, and it's just not, we don't see it because it doesn't fit an algorithm. There's so many people doing so many beautiful things, whether that's writing for communities, whether that's just showing up. I have through the Compassion Collective, we have weekly meetings, and just showing up to that meeting is doing something. Like even if you're just there to be there, like your presence matters in community development work. I don't know how we got in community development, but we could take it from there. The one thing I'll say about community development, there's a lot of literature out there. There's a lot of really great past movement builders where you can read about. I think that the ones that talk about the lived experience, I think a lot about Sarah Schulman. She was part of the ACT UP movement in the 90s, um, and so hearing the stories of that movement building and the conflicts and the challenges and all of these things, I think is really important. And don't let it freak you out. Like really, like if you are really living your values, you're gonna find the people, like, or they're gonna find you. And um that's my like advice. Like, and I also understand trauma, and I understand all the fear and of being in these systems that didn't treat us with the dignity and respect that we deserve. Those structures are not designed to hold the diversity of human life, but there are communities. Just I always say, you want to start a community, grab a friend. That's it. You just need two. It takes two to tango, and then you can move it from there. And that's how the Collective started 2 years ago. It was just me and a friend. I said, you want to start some online meetings? She's like, okay. And that was it. And now we're here. So
Nice. Well, I'm struck as you were saying, talking about not wanting to call it a model and then drifting into community work. And to me, it sounds very much like it's culture work,
Mm.
right? That it's not about giving us a framework. It's about recreating a culture that we've forgotten about how to be in connection and in relationship in a way that honors difference and complexity. Understanding that complexity, like I always come from a lens of like, we are a part of nature, we are not separate from it. And everywhere you look, nature is a complex being, right? Whether you look at it from like world weather patterns
Hmm.
all the way down to like what the spider web in your front porch is doing,
Hmm.
right? There's complexity happening at all levels of the scale. And I think that we forget that, and the Western mind, like it's just the reductionist. It wants to reduce. And so we want a model to tell us what to do.
Yeah.
But culture has always been extremely land based, extremely specific to the land it's based on.
Hmm.
And so the people in the culture develop relationship with each other in relationship to the land, because whether the seasons are changing or what fruit is coming up for you, right? Like what is available to you depends on the season and the very land that you're on. And so that becomes woven into an indigenous culture as not just a way of survival, but a being in active relationship with the land. And I think that that's something, Robin Wall Kimmerer talks a lot about that in her work. And in Braiding Sweetgrass, she talks about similar things about how we learn language and how, even the way we name things, right? In English language, it's like, well, it's so and so's flower, right? And it's like,
Mhm.
no. Versus in a Native American language, they're going to name that flower something that tells you something about it. Like,
Mhm.
oh, it's the first one of spring, or tastes like watermelon, right? Like you're going to have some sort of referential relationship point
Yes.
that's part of the language, right? So I think that I feel like what we're struggling with in this moment in time is that, and this is a gross generalization, right? That Americans are waking up to the fact that we don't actually have a culture.
Mhm.
And what they thought was our culture, they're watching it actively crumble and then burn. And
Mhm.
they're like, oh God, what do I do? Right? There's, I think, a collective disorientation that people are going through.
Oh, yeah. 100%.
I,
I mean, it's fascinating. And so there's something about being autistic, maybe. I don't know. I don't know why this is for me. I just knew this from a young age. Like that, whoa, that's weird. What are we doing out here? Like, that's weird. I'm gonna try and not be part of that as much as possible, right? And I mean, even in my young adulthood, when my kids were born, they're 23 now, but I moved to kind of a smaller town, Eastern Oregon, because I was like, there's no way I'm doing this here. I know what I went through in those schools, all of these things. We lived on 5 acres, like, we did the kind of like, let's just
homestead
be
thing.
our we didn't, none of us know we were autistic, but let's be our little autistic family by ourselves out here, away
Yeah.
from everybody. And I mean, I'm so glad I did that. And I also wish uh, we had more opportunity um, for people to choose that, right? Like to choose to live differently. We're so caught into this hamster wheel of capitalism. It's like, um, I have so much privilege. I need to say that out loud that I was able to when I hit that block, when everything fell apart, um, I had relationships. And that's probably one of the biggest privileges I have is that I had people who said, "Let me help you back up." And not with money, not with, but people who said, "You're worth your life is worth living, and let's help make it that way again." And I think maybe we won't have much of a choice but to embrace that kind of interdependent remembering might be the here again, right? Because yeah, the disintegration of a worldview, which is kind of what this was, right? The Western worldview, um,
Mm.
that can be really challenging. That can be um, psychologically a difficult process to go through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where I live outside of Asheville, almost 2 years ago is when Hurricane Helene came through here. And, I spent 35 years living in Florida before I moved here. And so I've seen more than my fair share of hurricanes
Mhm.
and what damage and what kind of preparations that you do. I've also seen how much living in the city for most of those years, people were completely dependent on the system and didn't know how to take care of themselves or each other because they were used to like, oh, just pay someone to do that, right?
Mhm.
And so after a storm, you kind of have to wait for the government to swoop in because you're landlocked into a way that there's no way you could get your own resources if you wanted to.
Mhm.
But very much like you were saying, I have moved up here out into the country with my kids for that very reason. I mean, I'm in my late 40s now, so I feel like it's taken me a long time to get here and I've wanted to
Mhm.
be here. But meeting the people in this area, watching them go through post hurricane and then being like, yeah, I mean, FEMA didn't show up because we showed up for each other because it was already baked into the DNA of rural living. It's not
Yeah.
like, oh, just call an Uber to take you to the airport. They don't come out here. So you have to have relationships. You have to take
Hmm.
care of each other. And so it's been a real shift for me because I think it's been one of learning that interdependence, that culture of interdependence from a healthy perspective. Because I think of I had COVID in, back in the early 2020s, right? And my kids were little and we were all sick and my grass got really tall in the front yard and I lived in town and the city wrote me a ticket because I didn't mow my yard. And I was like, all right, are you going to come mow it for me? Right? Like, no. And I'm sure one of my neighbors reported me because there was an older gentleman who liked his yard very neat, right?
Hmm.
Did anyone bother to come knock on our door and be like, I haven't seen you outside for a week. Are you okay? No. But my neighbor here, she texts me, is like, hey, do you want my husband to come and like knock down that side for you that's gotten really tall, but like where you park? And I was like, oh, no, it's okay. I'll get to it. And she was like, no, I'm saying it because I'm proud of you as a single parent. And I know how hard it was to be a single parent. And I'm saying I believe in you. And I was like, oh my God, I'm so used to people doing this as a way to control and manage
Yeah.
something in my life that was inconvenient for their life that it never dawned on me that you were doing it because you genuinely wanted to help.
Wow. Wow. This is gonna be a good closing to the podcast. Gosh. Yeah, I think about that often on different levels because I grew up in a particular class structure. Interdependence was just how we did things. I never thought anything really of it. You know, if somebody needed to live at our house for 2 years because they lost their job, they lived at our house for 2 years because they lost their job. If somebody didn't have a car and somebody had one that they weren't using anymore, that person took that person's car. You know, like it was just those were normal experiences in my family, and in my community when I was young. Um, and I'm not saying it's better or worse. There's something about kind of that survival logic, kind of is what I call it. Like when you don't when you don't have the resources to just pay someone to fix something,
Yeah.
you become pretty creative, right? Really
Yeah.
creative. I mean, and that's what I mean by like my privilege of relationship has allowed me to be creative and to be where I am now, um, doing this work. Um, and I have to continuously be creative with it, but um, at least that's one of my strengths, I guess. But I never really understood until I really got in social media and was kind of introduced to other ways of people were in community together. Not saying that one's better or worse, it's just kind of where they, with having certain resources creates different kinds of interaction. I was just so surprised that people don't just knock on their neighbor's door for a cup of sugar. Like all the like this is like just no like that's not normal. Like I don't understand that. Like I don't understand that. And uh, but it makes sense. It makes sense that when we have um, made everything like a subscription, right? Like, I don't, like instead of your sister coming over to help you clean the windows one day, oh, someone every 2 months does that for me. I'm like, no, my sister comes over and helps me clean the windows. But it's like, and I think people are going to start to recognize the value in that. And I think almost that right there, like actually having more scarcity uh in having just kind of community needs being met will kind of forces people to find more creative ways to do that and more relational ways to do that, to some degree. um I noticed like when we had the food stamp issue here in Portland, well, it's across the United States, but in the Portland area, uh uh, there was a local coffee shop, just a small little coffee shop that was like, "Hey, this is just posted it on Facebook, just like, hey, this is crazy, not cool. Just come get a free burrito if you guys need, or a free breakfast or whatever you guys need." And that kind of just like blew up, and then all of a sudden, community members were sending donations, just tons and tons and tons and tons and tons to this little coffee shop. And then the coffee shop was like, oh, I just wanted to give away free burritos, like I don't know what to do with this. But I don't know how much they ended up donations they ended up getting, and they did some really great things with it. Continue the program. It's continued, for people who maybe because the food stamp situation isn't really resolved. Some people are getting kicked off of it who technically should qualify still, and these types of things. Um, and so they're still doing that program, which is just it's not perfect. They're a nonprofit. They're still an organization. There's still set tax incentives in the long run, but that's not really the point. Other organizations started doing it too. They saw them do it and they were like, oh yeah, we could do that. We could do that. We could do that. We could do that. And then now we don't have that issue. And Portland is not perfect by any means whatsoever. We have some challenges still politically. Um, you know, we have some challenges with some racialized situations. I mean, we're one of the last states to, get there. So we're we're still behind in a lot of areas. But one area that I find and that I will always think, as I've lived here pretty much my entire life, is there's something we do differently here with community that I think we 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 do well. We do well, and we show um, other communities that it can be done, which even if it's done imperfectly. So I appreciate that about my city and my state and my upbringing.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I think it's an important point too, as we're closing, is I think that there is a lot of bridge work to be done because I definitely grew up and I'm an only child. So the scarcity of relationship
Mm.
is a real one. And it's something I have been playing with a lot lately is leaning into awkwardness
Yeah.
and realizing how much people struggle to make community because we're afraid to be awkward and we're afraid to be rejected. We didn't grow up borrowing and sharing and doing these kinds of things and trusting others with our things, right? And
Yeah.
so it's been something for me that's been like a learned like, oh, this is how I don't know where these people are. Okay, I'm just going to start hosting things and see who shows up. I'm
Hmm.
just going to start, hey, do you want to make dinner together? Right? Like trying to lean into how to start weaving these threads of connection so they become stronger ropes of connection, right? So they're not just threads, but actually ropes that can support you when you need them. And and I think you're right too that a lot of it sometimes is just the mindset shift. A
Hmm.
big reason why I started the Regenerative Hearth is I want to be interviewing and talking to people because Asheville has a very similar kind of thread within it that is
Hmm.
very much in that community oriented. At the bottom of my street is a bakery, very much like the burrito example, but they were a
Hmm.
bakery and have the food pantry now that they run as part of it, post Helene. And that's something that I think people sometimes just need the seed of an idea to be like, oh, well, how could that work in my place and my
Yeah.
land and my community, right? And then, oh, so I see the framework of what you did. How can I take those lessons and apply it here?
Mhm.
But sometimes that's all they need. I think they just need the seed of like, oh, that actually worked. Okay, well, if I tweaked it in this way, that could work for us, right? I think so that sharing of information is so important right now to
Yeah.
bridge people into trying new ways of being because so many of us did not grow up with that.
Yeah.
And it's an active skill and a muscle we're having to learn not
Mhm.
just to flex but to build so that we can actually use it in meaningful ways, not just when you need a cup of sugar, but like,
Yeah.
oh, the power went out for a week. How
Hmm.
do we all survive,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah, exactly. We had that happen here too. Uh, Yeah, and I think permission, like that's one thing I want to leave our listeners with is like give yourself permission to connect with new people. And like it's okay to be weird or awkward or off you might be off-putting or whatever. I mean, I've experienced all those things. I'm not a normal human being, and I'm proud of that actually. So but it is difficult in the beginning. Like a lot of the early work that I was doing 7 years ago after my divorce and after, feeling very rejected in a lot of ways from community and other spaces.
Mhm.
It was just giving myself permission and enough courage. Like, right? Like I I was not accepted in some communities. and had to accept that, right? Accept that it wasn't a good fit and try again. That was maybe the one thing my mom taught me, um, that I'm very grateful for, that she left behind for me, was that it's okay to make mistakes and try again. Like,
Mm.
and that's the same thing with like community building. It's okay to make mistakes and try again. There's 8 billion people on the planet. We got a lot of fish in the water, in the sea, and I think finding your people is not about like. And one thing, the last thing I'll leave, the last thing we could go on forever. Um, the last thing is in my work, and I'm not saying everybody needs to do this. This is just specifically how I organize. Is not by ideology. It's not about your political affiliation. It's not about what movement you're part of or not part of. It's none of those things. I mean, it's just like community is humanity. It's just like can we hold difference? That's the truth. The truth of a real community that can hold difference, and how you hold that difference. And that was probably the biggest lesson that I learned in my community building is um, when I was searching for a community and searching through labels and things of that nature, a lot of times it didn't work. And when I tried to build community through reduction, through specific labels and things like this, it often didn't work. So just something to think about.
Yes. Yes, I think you're right. That the identity piece is, I think, where we get stuck because as
Yeah.
I've even seen in the last 5 years, what used to be an identity and a definition is no longer that identity and definition. It has
Mhm.
evolved. And
Yeah.
so I think it's something that how can we start to think about what are our own values and how do they feel in our body when we are around people, right? Do we feel like, oh, I'm in alignment with my values? I'm in alignment with authentically who I am when I'm around these people? Versus our mind starting the checklist of like, okay, well, are they this political affiliation? Do they live here? Do they do that?
Hmm.
Right? Like,
Hmm.
can we lean into that trust in that space of the body having a sense that's maybe smarter than our mind to know when we found our people?
I love that. I love that. Oh, that's so great. Yes, because I feel like um it, it's just a habit, right? There's no harm like to think about like, hey, I built this habit of like wanting to align with these specific check boxes. And so it's a habit for us then to when we build community to think about those things. And those things are important too. But what does it actually feel like? What does it feel like to be in a space with these people or this human or this collective or this however whatever it
Yeah.
is. Anyways, thank you, Kara. This was a wonderful conversation. I'm so glad that you came on today. I appreciate it so much.
Me too. Thank you for having me share. This was a delight on a rainy afternoon here in Asheville. You were a bright spot in my day.
Ah, me too. You were a bright spot in my day. And thank you to our listeners. I'm going to push stop because I never know how to end these things. Peace out.